This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.
Welcome to the Lake Superior Podcast. I'm Walt, Lindala.
And I'm Frida, Waara. We are made stronger by story, and there's no better source than the continent's largest body of fresh water, Lake Superior.
So join us as we highlight the 5 national parks that ring this greatest of the Great Lakes, meet the people, tour the places, and learn about the projects that make these parks and body of water so remarkable.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara.
Welcome once again to the Lake Superior Podcast. Today, Frida, something a little bit different, but something we kind of do hear a lot about here in the Great Lakes region is artists in residence. What do you got lined up here today?
Well, have you ever been to Rabbit Island?
I can't say I actually have.
You know, it's not one of our 5 national parks on Lake Superior, but certainly a very, very special place. And they've been having an artist in residence program for a few years. And boy, when I learned a little bit about Victoria and being out there at Rabbit Island, I gotta get to know her.
So that's what we're going to do here today. Joining us on the line now is Victoria Manganiello, who is artist in residence at Rabbit Island. Hello and welcome to the podcast, Victoria.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to tell you about Rabbit Island.
Yeah, well, let's get right into that. Tell us about Rabbit Island a little bit. I mean, where are you? How big is this island? And then we'll talk a little bit about how you got there. Tell us a little bit about Rabbit Island.
Sure. So I am just a visitor, but I have been gifted the time to be here. We're about 4 miles off the Keweenaw Peninsula, right in Lake Superior. And the island itself, I believe, is around 91 acres, and in its perimeter, just under 2 miles. So pretty small, but feels big when you're here alone.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about that. How did you get there? You said you've been gifted the time through an artist in residence program, of course, but tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm a practicing artist, and one of the things that we get to do and is part of our work as working artists is residencies. So organizations like Rabbit Island exist around the country, around the world even, and provide funding for artists like me to come and find inspiration, create projects that respond to the space and the community. So I learned about Rabbit Island years ago, and it definitely has a great reputation amongst my creative circles over in New York. I applied once, didn't get accepted, but then applied again and was ultimately accepted. I believe this is the 12th year that they've invited artists. So when I was offered the opportunity, I flew out here and took a boat over. Andrew, the director, gave me a ride and dropped me off, and I've been here ever since.
Victoria, that's been going on your second week now?
Yes, and I'll actually be returning in October to sort of bookend the season because of the nature of the project that I'm working on. So I'll actually be departing from the island and then come back in October when they close up camp for another week.
Well, let me ask you about your project. I mean, what is it that you are doing? If you're shifting your time around like that, what is the piece or the work that you are into?
So I'm an artist that works across many mediums, but my primary medium is textile. So I'm a yarn spinner, I'm a weaver, and I make my own dyes and colorants from pigments that I source from both natural and synthetic materials. And so the project that I'm working on here is a very specific focus on both conceptually and materialitily the differences between natural and synthetic things. So I've been here sourcing colors directly from the island, the trees and the fungi and even the the ash from the campfires that I've been making have all been part of the chemistry, the natural and ancient chemistry that I'm utilizing to get color. And then I'm going to go back home to Brooklyn and sort of respond creatively to the colors I discovered, and work with some synthetic materials too. So ultimately, I'll produce a book that's kind of a recipe guide for folks that want to make their own colors from natural materials, like the ones you would find on this island, but also speculates conceptually about, what makes something natural, what makes something synthetic.
Victoria, is this your first trip to Lake Superior?
It is, yeah. It's a spot that I've been familiar with on the map, but it's certainly my first time here.
What are you learning about our Big Blue?
It's not too different from New York City in certain ways, and maybe that's a surprising thing to hear. But
it takes me back a little bit. To hear that.
Yeah, well, on its face, couldn't be more different. They certainly look and smell different, but the experience of sort of constant stimulation and chaos and unpredictability is quite familiar to me as someone from Brooklyn. The weather has been sort of in charge, let's say. We've had a variety of different weather patterns, and I've both enjoyed that and found it stimulating and inspiring. I've also been learning and including listening to some of your guys' episodes about the region, which has been really inspiring for me. And in particular, learning more about copper, because that's actually a material that we use in the processing of natural pigments. So I hope to spend some more time in the surrounding area to learn more about the copper history.
Well, you mentioned a similarity with this sort of the largeness, the vastness, maybe the unpredictability of the city. Are there other things maybe that you've noticed, or things that are obviously different? I mean, obviously the population is a big change, but I mean, and the weather, but what are some of the things that are resonating with you that are differences that you're going to take back with you?
I think being here has helped me slow down a bit. Not in a creative way. In some senses, my creativity inspiration has a new speed, but I've been enjoying just kind of moving and being in a way here that city life kind of passes over. I'm learning a little bit more about how I want to live in the world, and it's been a real pleasure to have such an extended amount of time in the wilderness.
I am just imagining, Victoria, you are the only person on that island. So 91 acres, if we were to take 91 acres of New York City and find out what the population density was there.
Yeah.
My goodness. But certainly there's a lot of critters. There aren't any bears on Rabbit Island, are there?
That's correct.
Okay.
But if you wouldn't be surprised that that's the most common question I got from friends and family. What are you going to do about the bears? Well, there aren't any bears. There's rabbits, or they're actually hares, I should say. And they don't seem too scared of humans. So I haven't caught one or anything like that, but they've gotten pretty close to me. Plenty of bugs. My tolerance for spiders has also been raised.
Oh, yeah.
There's some big spiders out here, snakes, which don't bother me so much. And then also I caught a salmon. I got my Michigan fishing license before I came and caught a salmon. I was super proud of that.
We're talking with Victoria Manganiello, who is artist in residence at Rabbit Island in Lake Superior. She is at the island right now, and we appreciate her taking a few moments to talk with us here on the podcast. I'm going to kind of maybe go a little off script here in the sense, Victoria, of questions, but when I visit the cities, whatever they are, Chicago, Detroit, wherever they are, right? One of the things myself and my wife like to do is as soon as we're back in Marquette, we try to get back to at least a drive or a little walk by the big lake because of that ability to allow us to kind of find a slowdown in it. Would you say that that's kind of what you're feeling by spending this time around Lake Superior?
Yeah, it's definitely slowing me down in certain ways. Time is slippery out here, and that's a quote from Andrew, the Rabbit Island director. He said that before I arrived, and it's totally true. Time is slippery. So it's both felt like it's gone super quickly because it's been exciting, but it's also slowed me down in a way I really appreciate.
How do you think that this will process for you as an experience for inspiration?
Wow, I think I'll continue to learn the answer to that question as time goes on.
We're talking with Victoria Manganiello, who is artist in residence at Rabbit Island, and Frida kind of alluded to it there a little, Victoria, but you're alone out there. Let's talk about this a little bit. Like, are you camping? Is there some kind of facility there for someone that's not familiar with what happens here? You said you were dropped off. But obviously there's some preparation into this, but what do you have there?
Yeah, so they brought me over. Andrew, the director, brought me over by boat. But there are two structures on the island. I believe they're the only two structures. One has a sauna, which I've been enjoying every day, collecting firewood and making myself a sauna, jumping in the lake afterwards. And then the second structure has a basic sort of kitchen setup with a hot plate and some storage for food, all of which I brought with me from the mainland. There's also a library there, and all of the artists that are invited to come out, we each bring 2 books to add to the library. So 12 Years of Artists has created a really eclectic and interesting library, which I've certainly been enjoying perusing. But on top of those things, I brought some materials and tools to make with. So I'm a yarn spinner, so I brought my suspended spindle, and I brought some wool that I got from Iceland, where I did a residency a few years ago, actually. And so I've been spinning a lot of yarn. I brought some materials and tools to process the colorants and pigments that I'm sourcing from the island. I brought some notebooks, and I brought a sleeping bag, and it's basically camping. I don't want to call it glamping because it doesn't feel like it fits into that category, but because there are these two structures, I'm not sleeping directly on the ground. I've got a little bit of shelter.
And I can imagine as you're looking for those pigments to make the dyes, you're finding some wonderful ashes, grays, browns, maybe even some variations of blues. Are you finding anything red? Or I'm not sure if the blueberries are out there or if Rabbit Island has them. It might be that they're so browsed over from the hares that are on the island, you don't get a chance to see them. But what are you finding for that color palette?
Yeah, well, when you walk around, and I'm sure that the flora and fauna is pretty similar around the perimeter of Lake Superior. There's right now so much green. But when we process these materials and extract their colorants, we usually don't get green. It's one of the harder colors to get from nature. So I'm able to get a lot of yellows and browns. The baby pine cones are giving me sort of a pinky salmony color, which has been really beautiful. And then you can modify the colors using different kinds of minerals and other inorganic things. So I've been playing a little bit with the ash from the campfire to support my experimentation. And then I also brought with me some aluminum and some ferrous, some iron, and also copper.
Okay. So I can see the copper connection now. As you said, you were looking into that there with Lake Superior and with the Keweenaw Peninsula. Have there been any experiences with the wilderness in terms of how they inspire your work? I mean, you mentioned that you see a lot of green, but yet when you go to extract the green, you're not getting the green. Tell us a little bit maybe about some of these experiences and how they're inspiring what you're doing.
Yeah, the green is everywhere with your eyes, but from a chemical process, it doesn't totally translate to green when we extract the pigment. But the time in the wilderness has been a totally green one, walking around, crunching on pine cones. The lichen has also been a source of beauty, and also something that I've been extracting color from, which is a new experience for me. I've never worked with lichen pigment before.
Was this what you were expecting? Like, you kind of caught me a little bit it caught my attention when you said that, you're walking around and obviously you see a lot of green, but it doesn't just kind of translate over. Was that something you were expecting? Was that a bit of a surprise?
That's not a surprise for me. I've been working with natural pigments for years, so that's something that we quickly learn that the color that you see from the source plant is often not the color that you end up with after you've gone through the extraction process.
Gotcha.
But it's another reason I'm super excited that I get to return in October, because all of these greens will probably be reds and yellows by then.
Fabulous. Oh, yes, it's going to be so, and what a change. You're going to have so much to tell about that. I wanted to get back for just a second at thinking about how this experience, and you've already have residencies in some far off, wonderful places. How long does it take before you feel like you're actually, you get dropped off and there's that settling time, and now you're getting ready to say goodbye as the next group comes in? What is that? I guess it's almost like a circular kind of feeling for saying goodbye now to not only a place, but what it's done to you.
Yeah, I like the way that you frame that, Frida. I think I'll discover more once I'm back home, because I'm still so much in it. But the time here has really, it's been, I've never done anything like this before. So I've felt like it's been easy and natural, and like it's been out of my comfort zone. So it might just be that juxtaposition of returning home that's going to help me recognize exactly what feels different. But I've learned a lot about myself. I'm not as reliant on the city as I might have thought. Using the island for everything, including your kitchen and your bathroom and your bedroom, has been relatively easy for me.
Victoria, I want to share, I've had an opportunity in my life to do a couple of expeditions. And I know when we chatted before, where you're sleeping is basically three-sided. You've got a netting on one side, but you're feeling the breeze and the waves, and the night is open to you. And I'm wondering, when you return home, how easy it's going to be for you to walk in and sleep indoors, like truly indoors. We're going to have to catch up about that one, girl.
Yeah. Well, they call it green noise, right? People get these apps so that they can listen to green noise to help them fall asleep. And that's totally what I've had. I don't know if you can hear the sound of the lake in the background, because I'm standing right on the shore. But it's been the backdrop to everything, and I've been falling asleep to it. The whir of my air conditioning back in Brooklyn is not going to be as soothing.
Right. We're talking with Victoria Manganiello today. She is joining us from Rabbit Island in Lake Superior, where she is an artist in residence here over the next little bit. With this, do you end up actually presenting a final project to those that sponsor the Artist in Residence program? You mentioned earlier in our conversation about doing a book and some sort of presentation and research on that, but is there a final project that is part of this process?
Yeah, so I will be making a book, and it's supported simply by the residency having invited me out here, and I believe that they get their support from the National Endowment for the Arts. The book is going to include a series of recipes, so if folks want to try and get their own colors from nature, from the sorts of source materials like I've got out here, they can follow along. Which is super fun. You can dye some old socks and T-shirts and kitchen towels. You can make art, you can make design. So we'll have recipes in there, but it'll also have some musings and reflections from my time here. So that book, it'll be an artist book. I'm not totally sure when it'll be out and available, but hopefully in time for next season's artists to be able to utilize it.
Can I ask you a question about this project and why you're doing this? Why do you feel as an artist it is important to be doing this? Do you see an historic component to it? Do you see an application in the modern world? Do you see learning about colors in general from this? What is important to you as an artist to take this time and do this project?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, I'm really interested in materials, and in my practice as an artist, I'm almost always looking at materials closely. And I'm motivated to do this because I've noticed, and I think many of us can agree, that we live in a world now where most people are quite unaware of the materials that they rely on every day. Their clothing is made by hands that they'll never see. We have a real lack of sense of where things come from, how they are translated after we're done with them, and then, of course, the climate crisis and other social issues are directly connected to that. So my hope is in making objects and books and documentaries that tell us more about the materials that we use every day, that people might be a little bit more in touch with that and therefore a little bit more intentional and careful. And hopefully that'll translate back into our planet.
Let's stick on that subject for just a second, Victoria. The idea of what you're weaving. So you brought some yarn with you. You brought some, that you can spin. Have you been experimenting at all with weaving grasses or other, I'm trying to think. The Native Americans were making fabulous baskets. They also used a lot of birch. I don't know how much birch is on Rabbit Island. I'm guessing it's pretty popular there. But any other materials that are kind of coming to you that could also be into an art project?
Yeah, there's definitely some birch here. I haven't been doing much weaving. The wool that I brought is actually raw fiber, so I'm spinning it into yarn, and then I've been using that yarn to dye with the pigments that I'm making. And when I go back home to my studio, I'll eventually weave that. But just like you said, the Native Americans, among so many other indigenous groups, were really well skilled with these kinds of techniques. But most of us, Americans and otherwise, you can order a basket on Amazon for 99 cents. And we just live in a world where things like that are so readily available that we forget the ingenuity and the skill that historically has gone into creating them.
You mentioned a moment ago about like coming back in the fall, coming back in October and seeing the greens then not be green anymore and the colors that we see in the fall. What else are you looking forward to when you return to Rabbit Island in October?
Well, it's going to be cold, so I'll definitely have different things in my bag, different clothes, and maybe a warmer sleeping bag. But I think it'll be really interesting to come back after having spent a couple months back in the city, bookending the season out here. I've gotten familiar with the paths, the desire lines, walking through collecting firewood from certain places. So it'll be interesting to see the nuances of the space itself and how that's changed. And then there's also 2 more artists in residence that are coming in after me. So who knows what they will have done and what they might have left behind for me to discover.
Mm-hmm. We're talking with Victoria Manganiello, who is an artist in residence at Rabbit Island in Lake Superior. Victoria, how can people find out maybe more about you and your artwork that you've been creating and what you may be creating out of this experience?
Yeah, so I'm a social media user, so folks can find me on Instagram at Victoria Manganiello. And I also am part of a creative artist collective called Craftwork Collective. On Instagram, we're Craftwork_collective. But definitely check out the Rabbit Island Instagram as well, which I believe is at Rabbit Island. They've been posting photos about me and the residency that I'm doing, as well as so many other photos and documentation of the other artists that are coming through the program. And if you're an artist yourself listening, I totally encourage you to apply for this opportunity. It's been really awesome.
Well, we appreciate your time today with it today. Yes. I mean, this has just been really interesting. And I'm actually hoping that maybe we can line up another conversation with you once you get back in October and have that experience. And we can do a compare and contrast kind of thing with you to talk about it a little bit. So, do you have any final thoughts for us? I mean, as we wrap up here with you and you can get back to being by yourself on Rabbit Island.
No, I'm grateful that you were interested in including my story and Rabbit Island on the podcast. I think it's great that you guys are focusing in on this natural landscape of Lake Superior and telling all the stories that are happening here. So I'm glad I get to be part of it.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you on today, and we wish you all the best. And let's talk again sometime after you're through with your time in October. How's that?
Sounds good. I'll talk to you then.
It's Victoria Manganiello, who is an artist in residence at Rabbit Island, joining us from Rabbit Island. And, it's real interesting because from our perspective on this podcast, we've talked a lot about things like the indigenous peoples and their art and their creativeness and, the colors that are used in a lot of indigenous, not only to the Lake Superior region, but around the world, are basically done by what she's doing. You find a color that you like and you try to distill it out of it. You try to get it out of it and use it as a dye or something. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But it sounds like Victoria's having a pretty good go at this.
I just also can't wait to talk to her again.
Right.
To find out. It's one thing to leave the bustling city. I mean, you and I think Marquette's a big city. Can imagine. And she's the only person for 91 acres. And to return to that and then come back again. It's going to be a lot to process.
I don't know if I could be a person in just 91 acres by myself, even as work from where we are. But, we'll hopefully get that lined up and get a chance to talk with her again. And of course, this is what we like to do with the podcast. So if you're listening today and you have some ideas, you can find us through the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. Just drop a message, any of the social medias. If you see where the podcast is, let us know if you've got an idea, because we're always wanting to find out more about folks that are on the big lake and get inspiration from the big lake and tell the story of the big lake. And, Frida, Victoria was just perfect for that today, wasn't she?
Yes. And helping us to understand why we need that quiet time, why we need to just be in the presence of, as she said, the green noise out there. We hear all kinds of stories about white noise or whatever, but she is really experiencing the outdoors. And I'm grateful that it's going to come back out in her artwork, I know.
I'd be interested to talk with her sometime this fall or early winter. I think that's going to pretty much wrap it up for us here with this latest Lake Superior podcast. We thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do this again sometime soon with somebody that is doing something as unique as this. I'm Walt Lindala.
I'm Frida Waara. Thanks for listening. The National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation, NPLSF, is the only official nonprofit 501c3 fundraising partner of the National Park Service for all 5 U.S. national park sites on Lake Superior.
To learn more about NPLSF projects and programs, you can visit the website at nplsf.org or friend them on Facebook.
I'm Frida Waara.
And I'm Walt Lindala. Thanks for listening to the Lake Superior Podcast.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.